This is Adopt Responsibility, episode 4. I'm Caleb Landis with my buddy Matt Whedon, and today we're talking about masculinity, what we admire in men, and the kind of men that we aspire to be. But first, we need to
continue our conversation
that we were just having before we started recording, and talk about this idea of cyber rights, and in light of all of the crazy censorship that is happening online these days. Matt, what do you have to say?
Maybe first I'll just quickly lay out kind of what you laid out before I was like, stop, let's just get on our podcast and start talking about it. You were just kind of opening the question saying, hey, what do you think of the question of these companies, big tech companies, YouTube, Google, Facebook, Twitter, the companies that so much of our public discourse, basically all of our public discourse is happening through. What do you think about the fact that as they've gained power, they've become more corrupt? And I'm kind of paraphrasing your words. I know you didn't use these precise words.
I trust you.
As they've gained power, they've become more corrupt. And as, especially recently over the course of coronavirus and riots and everything, there's just been so much censorship. So, for example, today or yesterday, between Google and Facebook, or actually mainly it was Twitter, I think, that has been censoring tons of conservative voices, and especially PragerU is one of the big ones, who they took them off Twitter for promoting an article or a video of a bunch of doctors talking about hydroxychloroquine. And we don't need to, I don't really care about having that conversation about what medication is best. The problem is you don't take somebody off Twitter for that, especially not when so many other prominent people who aren't conservative have shared the same articles and the same videos without being removed. For example, almost the exact same article was shared by CNN like a month ago. And, basically CNN shared an article that said many doctors think hydroxychloroquine might be useful, and, comparing that study versus other studies. And then PragerU posted a video of a bunch of doctors saying, hey, we actually think this might be useful, and boom, they're gone. So you were opening the question with all this censorship. How should the relationship be between the state and these free market businesses that are they've whether by force or not, really it hasn't been by force, they've become monopolies on our public conversation. Should they be enforced by some sort of laws to protect free speech? Is that a good enough summation of what you were?
I think that's a good way to put it. Good way to lead in. Yeah, it's the whole internet is a baby still. When you think about all of human history, man, this is part of why, side note, I might want to get a history degree instead of anything else, because I just think it's so crucial for the time that we live in. I mean, and I'm guilty of this too. I don't have as good of an appreciation as I should have for how recent so many things are, and how close we still are to things like World War II in the past, And so basically, what I'm trying to say is the internet's still a baby, and these platforms are infants in the scope of human history. And these are powerful new tools. And the way I would even say it is, it seems like we're creating a whole new dimension to reality. And I think Elon Musk would agree with me. And, there's this whole idea that we still do exist in the same capacity physically, but we're kind of adding into our mental and emotional existence this whole other dimension of social media. And like you said, it's primarily the way that most people are having their having political discussion right now, which is horrible. And one of the things that I hope to change in my own life through this podcast is to actually have intelligent, long form conversations about things. Not that I'm bringing a ton of the intelligence or, well-developed opinions, but I hope to bring on guests that I can have those discussions with, people I agree with, or people I think I agree with, and people I think that I disagree with, and develop opinions that way. But the reality is that most people, and it seems, yeah, we've talked about this actually on previous episodes, but it seems like, especially when it comes to politics, everything just is on social media. I mean, when's the last time that you had a really long, good discussion about politics with someone that you were completely in disagreement with?
In real life,
yeah, face to face,
man,
that
years.
you really disagreed with about something.
Years.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, we don't really do it like that. But
let me qualify that too. That's years of like very frequent long conversations with people about politics who I disagree with. I'm just thinking they've all been on Skype or Facebook or WhatsApp. Actually, most of them WhatsApp, probably. Almost all of them WhatsApp, sending messages back and forth.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, like face to face, man, that's gone like the dodo bird in some ways, in terms of, especially in the West.
Well, and who owns WhatsApp? Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So what's to stop them from stepping in and saying, like, I mean, and this isn't some like far out thing to say. I mean, why wouldn't they just step in and start deleting people's texts to each other? Why wouldn't they have this panel of woke experts who are just stepping in to stop the hate speech or stop the microaggressions from happening? And wouldn't that be the logical, responsible thing for them to do if that's what we do in real life? Like, how dare they not do that on on the app that they own? And so, yeah, the whole question is, do we have rights in this reality, this virtual reality, or this digital form, these digital platforms for discourse? I think, I've thought about this, and I think I want to start a campaign called Make Facebook Fun Again. Because I used to, do you remember this? I mean, do you remember how fun Facebook used to be, where it's like you go on and you see pictures of people and their families or their friends, and they're doing fun things. You see cool videos, and it's like, oh man, they're, kind of see like the highlights from somebody else's life. I feel like now I can't go on Facebook without scrolling down like 3 posts without one of them for sure being political and probably having like a lengthy back and forth in the comments between people who disagree with each other. And I just think in a lot of ways it's turning into something it was not intended to be, and is, in my opinion, a horrible, horrible usage of a platform like that, especially if the platform has shown itself to be so far leaning in one direction. I mean, there's no way that you can make a case that Facebook or Twitter, any of these platforms, even Google at this point, are making an attempt at an open, free platform. That's not the goal anymore. There's such clear censorship going on that, So anyway, there's the question. Do we have rights in this reality, and cyber rights, whatever you want to call them? And what are they, and how do we fight for them without getting called horrible names?
The first thing I want to say is, did you know that Google, when they first started, had this motto, and it was on the wall in like Google headquarters: "Don't be evil." Did you ever hear that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they removed it.
No way.
That's all we need to know about that situation.
That was such a controversial statement, huh?
No, I think they're like, you know what? Actually, our motto's changed.
We're not really sure if we want to be evil or not anymore. Yeah, we might want to. We're just going to keep our options open. So taking that off the wall.
Yeah. Or they just spent so long being like, man, or, just being so evil. And then they saw that motto and they're like, man, I just don't want to be a hypocrite. Let's just take that thing down. Okay. Anyway. It's interesting because you might already know this, but I'll explain it anyway. Google, all the big tech companies are already in a legal conundrum because there's a you have to be either a publication like CNN or Fox News or whatever. You have to be either a publication, which is subject to libel laws, and if you defame somebody, like what happened to that mega kid, Nick Sandman,
The Catholic
CNN,
schoolboy.
Yeah, who was totally defamed online by CNN, Washington Post, all of those publications. Because their publication, they were subject to libel laws. So he sued and they settled. And so you either have to be a publication where you are editing things and you have a moral responsibility to edit out things that are bad and only tell things that are factual to a certain degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you can be a platform like AT&T, the phone company. You can be a platform that people can use, and you are not responsible for what people say on the platform. So if a murderer uses AT&T to talk to somebody else and be like, hey, let's go murder this person, AT&T is not held responsible because they're not editing out. And so what all the big tech companies have been doing is they've been claiming to be a platform. Oh yeah, you can use our platform. You can say whatever you want, but they've been editing out things that they don't like. They've been censoring things that they don't like. So they're already in a legal conundrum, and they have to, hopefully they will have to fall on one side of that or the other. And they will have to be well known. These are publications, and you go in and you are subject to their morality, so to speak. And everybody knows that, and hopefully they lose a lot of their credibility, or to just be, actually Facebook's been a lot better on this. And I think that's been mainly led by Mark Zuckerberg in his own desire for free speech, as opposed to like Jack Dorsey in Twitter is like totally, I haven't heard him say anything towards the value of free speech. And so, yeah, I think, there's already this legal conundrum, but before, even deeper than that, man, people just don't see a value for free speech. They don't understand why it's so important anymore. They don't I was sitting around a campfire with a guy. So this doesn't count as a face-to-face political disagreement because we weren't really talking about anything. I was just kind of listening to him talk about some of his political views, but he was saying, man, up in Canada, like, it's so good that we have like a lot more restrictions around like hate speech and stuff. Like in America, they just have like wide open. You can say anything you want. And I was gonna have the conversation with him. He was half drunk, but, and he was like, you can just say, you can make threats. And I'm just like, no, you can't. Like, obviously there's, you can only swing your fist as far as up to someone's nose, but you can't actually hit them. Right. And, but in terms of free speech, like, it's insane how little people value it today. And people talk about hate speech. People talk about, and people are censoring speech. So I think a huge problem is historians, people who understand the value of free speech have done a terrible job of explaining why it's so crucial, It's, to me, it's like, that's your soul. That's your essence. That's your ability to speak is everything to do with your reality as an individual. If you are an individual, if the individual is paramount instead of the group, then the very first thing you need is speech. So, yeah. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, agreed. So that legal conundrum you're talking about is really what sticks out to me. And my question, I guess, maybe you know more about this, is why have there not been people like Nick Sandman who've come out against Facebook or whoever else and say, hey, this person said some horrible thing about me on Facebook, and maybe it even actually led to some real violence or whatever. I'm sure that that's happened on Facebook. I'm sure there have been back and forths where people get verbally, or can't call it verbally, but whatever, writing back and forth to each other on Facebook, and people get hurt and physically in, the real world because of that. Why are people not suing Facebook or Twitter or these other outlets? I mean, isn't that the way to expose what's going on?
Yeah, they've always just claimed to be a platform. So it's not until they've started the censorship and the editing out that there is that conundrum. So they've always been safe because they've always claimed to be a platform. They've never been forced to become a publication. And so that process is just taking way too long. Yeah. And I'm hoping that it does come down to that. Maybe there is some middle ground that they can reach, and they can basically continually, be on the green side of the fence where they can claim to be a platform and continue to edit out and all this crap. Hopefully they can't find some middle ground to that. Like, I know in the courts in America, this is a huge question that's been asked for the last year. Lots of Senate hearings about it, bills that have been introduced. Nothing's been, yeah, the checks and balances, man, sometimes it's amazing, but sometimes it's like, holy crap, we've got a huge problem. We need to solve it. And so it's been a long process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I just wonder, we should look into this more. You know, if there have been those lawsuits, if people have kind of have tried to expose this in a way.
Well, they can't, because they've always claimed to be platforms. But I was just thinking about when Alex Jones was banned. So Twitter, Facebook, everything, YouTube, they all came together. And this is what, okay, also, let me get to my point. I'm really bad at like tangenting before I finish a point and then coming back to finish a point, and by then it's gone. So let me finish my point first. Alex Jones was banned at the exact same time on the exact same day by Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. That means they were all in cahoots, essentially, which is kind of funny because he's Alex Jones. And the joke is always like, we need to we need to make sure the government watches the schizophrenics more. Because the people who are paranoid about it, it's like, you couldn't have given him a better reason to be paranoid and more credibility to all of the paranoia that he's had, that like the government's against him and that all these big tech companies are against him and they're in cahoots, and they all ban him. This is okay. So we're out of conspiracy land. This is real life. They banned him at the exact same moment, which means they were on the phone saying, ready to ban Alex Jones. Okay. Hit enter and boom, he's gone. And that way he couldn't, if YouTube banned him, he couldn't go on his Facebook, which has millions of followers, and say, hey, I've just been banned from YouTube. Go to my website. Like I'm getting locked out of this place. He disappeared. And I'm sure that he's lost so much of his numbers of viewership and everything. Yeah. And wow. I don't care whether it's warranted or not. I don't care if Alex Jones is dead on right about everything, or if he may be possibly not correct about some of the things that he promotes. Anyway, that doesn't
that's
matter.
Not the point. Yeah, because that's not the point.
The point is they stopped him from saying what he was trying to say, and that was, I'm pretty sure that was around the time of him talking about like Pizzagate and all this stuff that sounded ridiculous at the time. If you remember that, it was basically, he was talking about this pedophile ring and stuff, and talking about this guy named Jeffrey Epstein who's nobody's ever heard about. Like in 2015, he was talking about him. And then years later, this all happens just as he's exposing like Pizzagate stuff, which it's just, you have to sit back and be like, crap. Like, first of all, crap, he was right about some of this stuff, but crap, they're in cahoots against a guy like this. And I think many reasonable people at that moment, the reasonable response by most people was like, yeah, he's gone. He was kind of crazy, whatever. But we should have all been like, hold on, you do not do this. That's a line you do not cross.
Yeah.
And so Alex Jones, what I think would have been brilliant is if he would have sued those companies, especially because he had the means to do it. I don't understand the whole legal system, but I imagine he could have sued them on both sides of that, sued them for the terrible things he said, that they've said about him. So you guys, sued them basically as if they're a publication, and then also sued them as if they were a platform. Like, hey, I've been hated on so much. Here's all this evidence of people literally making death threats over me. And it would put them in a legal conundrum to either fall on one side or the other. Yeah. It's, I'm just kind of hypothesizing, but something like that would have been brilliant, where it could have been someone with the means and they could have fallen on both sides, right?
Yeah. Well, and someone who, that's an instant headline if Alex Jones is doing that. Because this is exactly what you're saying, is what I was saying earlier, is somebody needs to make this a thing. Somebody needs to press the issue and have it be a big old lawsuit that makes them decide. Because in the end of it, I think you should be able to have a website where you only put on the website what you want to put there. But I also think that there has to be that distinction between the two. Are you a platform, or are you are you deciding, are you going to edit the content? Are you going to decide what's there? It's just so interesting that we think that a lot of people, but that a lot of people think that that's okay on a platform like that. But we would all be like, can you imagine if you're talking on the phone and you just start talking about something that AT&T or Verizon or whoever doesn't like, and your call just gets dropped. I mean, wouldn't that seem like a violation of your right to use that service and to talk on the phone? Completely it is, because you paid for the service and and you signed up for it. And you might not be paying for Facebook, but they're certainly getting paid for having you there. So there's that kind of relationship there. But anyway, so I guess maybe
let me just finish before, because I know we're trying to move on. The way I come down on it is I actually do think this is one of the few times I've felt like the government getting involved could actually be a good thing, because the huge risk is basically, the way I think, I'm super anti-government. Anytime in history you look at basically everything terrible that's ever happened, it's been from sometimes corporation being too big, but almost always because of government being too big, getting into people's lives, becoming corrupt. Snake in your own garden. It's not been, somebody at the gate. So I'm definitely far on the side of small government. We do not want to give these people any more power than we necessarily have to. But when it comes to free speech, I do fall on the side of, I think the value for free speech, it's not just that it needs to be held up legally I think the reason that free speech is a legal right, for me to be able to say, even on this podcast, the things I want to say to you, the value for that is the core issue. And that value for free speech needs to be upheld in the law. And so when you get to a point when so many people are being so heavily censored by certain people, and even to the point when you want to do a Google search, you look something up and the top 20 results are basically anything that's leftist and anything that's approved of by the left-wing people doing the sorting of the algorithm. Let's say 19 out of the top 20 articles. Usually there's a Fox News one in there, and they're considered credible. But it's like 19 out of 20 are super censored, super, the algorithm is not acting in accordance with the market of search. It's acting in accordance of some, guy probably on minimum wage who he's been approved because he's far enough to the left, and he gets to choose which searches go to the top. So in my opinion, I think the government should be involved in this, because there is a value for free speech that's not being upheld.
Yeah. Well, and what it comes down to, I mean, the way that I think of it is that, I mean, the government, more than anything, is there to protect its citizens' rights. Right. I mean, isn't that the number one function of government, to uphold the law and to uphold the law and protect the citizens' rights and protect the citizens overall against, for sure, foreign threats and all that stuff. And so you think about it that way, it's almost, I don't think you're kind of saying, well, I'm for small government, but I feel like they should get involved. I don't think you have to be, I don't think you have to be in support of growing the size or the influence of the government to just say, hey, this is a major new area, new territory that is kind of like the new wild west in a way. And we're just figuring out what's going on. And so we do need the rule of law to exist here. It's not that we need the government to become this big, huge thing, but we need, the citizens' rights to be upheld in this new territory.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think it is a growth of government. And the reason is because the laws that are being implemented, they're not actually breaking any of the previous laws. What's needed is like a new law to be written about tech, because when they wrote the Constitution, there was no amendment made for Facebook. There was nobody could foresee the internet, nevertheless, political divide on the internet. So you would actually need new laws and stuff, which I guess like that's always the case when new technology comes out. But generally speaking, like I would say that is growing the government, because it's also like the counter to my own position is, well, hey, these are free market, businesses. They've started a business model. It was successful and they're doing what they want to do on it, but we don't have to participate in it. And so, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate counter. And that's basically the reason that up until recently, I definitely fell more on the side of they shouldn't be restricted. And we need to, the idea of breaking them up because they're a monopoly, they haven't involved the government in building their monopoly. Therefore, I'm okay with the fact that they're a monopoly on the market of public discourse. But I would say over the course of what's gone on in COVID, my opinion has changed from that counter to what I'm saying to what I'm saying, which is no, it's not just that we need to uphold the previous laws about free speech. We need to implement a new law, because the direction that this is going is so evil, and it's so obvious, and it's so terrible, and it's so unavoidable without new laws. We can't avoid the evils of 1984 without some sort of intervention. And I think the only realistic intervention is probably going to be legal intervention. So,
yeah. Well, so here, let me say this. I disagree that it's a growth of government. I would just think of it as an adaptation to rights that have already existed through the laws for a really long time. So freedom of speech is really what we're talking about. In the bottom line, freedom of speech. And that's one of the first ideas of America is freedom of speech. Right. And so I would say, I guess the question is, does the internet count as a territory where you have free speech, or do these websites specifically count as a territory where you have free speech? And if the answer is, well, no, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want with their website, then I guess there's a case to be made there. But I just think it's that question that we need to keep coming back to, of have these platforms become so big that it is a private company. It started that way, but it's really grown into, like I was saying before, this new domain of reality where, and this is Elon Musk's thing about, hey, just so you know, we're all kind of morphing into cyborgs a little bit, where we do have our physical existence, but we also have this mental and emotional existence that is on the internet. And we even use that to like store our memories and things. And so it's this really interesting thing. And so it's, the question really is, does freedom exist? Does freedom of speech exist on those platforms? Or should it exist on those platforms? Or does it just exist with using the internet in general and saying, well, that's their platform. Like, if you want a different one, you can make yours.
That's the important thing there, because to me, I think that's the distinction. If you were to take this same thing and put it into a metaphor that would have worked in 1776, imagine a public square. There's a difference between a public square, and I would say that's the internet in this metaphor, where you can go to the public square and you can talk about whatever you want. And that's perfectly, not only is it fine, it's good. That is how we move forward, is to say what we have to say. So the public square is that situation. But imagine next to the public square, some guy with enough money to open a business with nice lounge chairs, and he provides cigars, and he says, you guys can come in here if you want to. It's your you can voluntarily come in here and have a conversation here. You sit down in these lounge chairs, I give you your cigar, and that's all on me because I have this awesome business. You sit here and have your discourse, and I make a bit of money off of ads selling you stuff. But this is my business.
On the walls.
Yeah, exactly. Literally on the wall. Nice. But yeah, that's the difference, is like the public square the government needs to implement free speech in that public square. But what about in the man's business? Does he have the right to kick somebody out because he doesn't? It's Alex Jones, for goodness sakes. Like, this guy's crazy. I need to get him out of here. And I would say that is the relevant. And so what I'm saying is, once everybody has moved into his lounge and the entire public conversation is there, we need a new law. We can't just protect the public square outside. We need a new kind of law. And all of a sudden, instead of the policeman standing on the public square, making sure that everybody's speaking freely and nobody's, cutting each other off. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Censoring people.
Yeah. Because
he needs to enter that building.
Yeah. Because in that analogy, everyone has absolutely moved into the private lounge. I mean, there's
no conversation outside of it.
Yeah, there really isn't. And there's been attempts. So Jordan Peterson launched this website, ThinkSpot. And I think the idea, if I have it right, is that they're just not going to censor anything unless they were forced to by a court of law or something along those lines.
Yeah, they're going to censor. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
they will censor anything in the same way that the government censors things. So any direct threat of violence, that's the free speech laws in the US. Any direct threat of violence globally, even if somebody from Sweden was to go on ThinkSpot, then they get cut out by ThinkSpot.
Okay. Right. So there are those, which, I mean, that sounds great, but like how many people are using ThinkSpot?
Exactly.
Like nobody comparatively, you know, I'm sure there are thousands of people who are, but relatively to the billions of people, the billions of Facebook accounts, personal accounts and pages that exist on Facebook, you know, so basically what I'm trying to say is in your analogy, I think it's actually a really good analogy, but the reality is that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google have become the public square. And I don't know exactly the best way to go forward because I'm not, you know, I'm not a lawmaker and I'm not as familiar with the history of all these laws and rights and how we make a new way forward. But I think it's important to realize that that absolutely is the case, that those platforms have absolutely become the public square. And so how do we go forward from there?
Nice. I feel like we actually made a lot of headway in that conversation.
Yeah, that was good. That was, now I can actually, I feel like we just thought that through really well together. And I don't think I could have fully done that by myself.
Yeah, that's the point of this podcast.
Yes.
So
love it.
All right. So what do you wanting to get into this into on this the rest of our time here in this podcast?
Yeah. So what we're talking about is just masculinity, and we could talk about femininity too, but we're both men, so we're going in this direction. Nothing against women, but in our minds, we're thinking, okay, who are the men?
For yourself.
What's that?
I said, speak for yourself.
Yeah. At least today I am. Who knows about tomorrow? We'll see how I wake up and what I feel like. But yeah, so we're thinking through right now, and I mean, not just this week or whatever, but we've been thinking through for years, unconsciously and consciously, what do we see in men that we admire? So first of all, who are the men that we admire? And then getting into what do we admire about them? And just forming that question in our minds and answering that for ourselves. Who are we growing into and why? And so I don't know how you want to do it. We could just start with people, or we could start with character traits or whatever and kind of analyze. I'm good with either way.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about, well, I feel like if we talk about character traits, then we're never actually going to get to the people. So why don't we just first both quickly think of some of the people or mention some of the people that we admire the most, people who we both know, and then we can kind of, you know, jive a little bit back and forth about what it might be about those people who we admire. So,
are we talking like leaving out historical figures?
No, I think just anybody.
Anybody's fair game. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the Sunday school answer and say Jesus. It's like classic Christian answer, but that's genuinely really true for me. Other historical ones that come to mind, honestly, the biggest one is Abraham Lincoln that I'm thinking of. Wow. I don't know as much about him as I probably should to say that, or for him to be the first one to come to mind. But everything that I do know of him is absolutely epic, and we can get into why a little bit later. It's funny that those are the only historical two that are popping into my mind because there are so many other people. But those are the first two that come to my mind. Present day.
It's very American. Jesus and Lincoln.
Hey, if the shoe fits.
A+.
Present day, man. You can just throw some in too. I don't want to take all of the the really good ones, but
I like when I realized that you were going to also talk about historical figures, then my mind went fictional. I think Aragorn is probably one of the men who I admire the most in any story, in any book, movie, anything.
Dang, yes.
Aragorn would
I love that we're going there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely on the top of the list. Other men, I'll just give you the names that are in my mind, and then we can continue on. So I'm thinking Jeremy. I won't say his last name, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Guy who's a bit older than us. Tiger. Similar situation.
No last name needed.
Yeah, exactly. No last name needed. Yeah, I actually sent Tiger a message this week, just telling him that I admire him and why I think I see him as such a leader. I haven't talked to him for a little while. Anyway, yeah, Tiger, Jeremy, those are friends of ours. And then, man, certainly Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, actually, Sam Harris, to throw him in that lot, Joe Rogan, very similar strain of people who I admire all of them for similar reasons. Yeah, and then going back into history, I think, if you look at my life, so much of it is directed around my admiration for Jesus. I think it would be unfair not to double down on him.
I was thinking another guy who's just in a little bit of a different area of society, or I don't know how to say that, but kind of in a different, feels like he's in a different spot. John Eldridge is a guy I think of in that same level of respect, without knowing a ton about him personally, just through having read his books, some of his books.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. And like in the way that we're talking about admire, I would actually back up on a few of those. I would say Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, they all have qualities that I admire, but as a whole, like they just kind of came to mind because I said Jordan Peterson. I would say as a whole, I admire Jordan Peterson, but the other three, I would say I admire qualities about them. Basically, the things I admire about all three of those guys are pretty similar. They say what they think. They're well thought through, and they're fighting for similar things I'm fighting for. But as a whole, they wouldn't be a role model, any one of them. Whereas certainly Tiger, Jeremy, Aragorn, Jesus, those are role models.
Yeah. I mean, I would say Aragorn's probably a pretty realistic role model. No, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, no, that's what I had in mind, is actually that we would, because I think it's important to separate and distinguish between what are the qualities we do admire and don't. So I was thinking of, anybody that comes to mind. And so another guy from Ben Shapiro's world, Andrew Klavan, is a guy that I probably admire on the whole, actually more than Ben Shapiro.
Yeah. Me too.
But so I think it's anybody who has any trait that we admire is fair game, and then we'll separate out why. Yeah.
Okay. The only other person who's coming to my mind is Jocko Willink. I think it's kind of unfair because I got on the like famous on the internet kind of stream of people. But yeah, certainly Jocko Willink. And I've often thought how in politics at the moment, how useful it would be to have a man like Jocko Willink at the wheel. Somebody who's so disciplined and trustworthy. And I've thought a little bit about, I don't feel like I understand. So maybe we can get into just Jocko a little bit. Like, I don't understand exactly what it is, but there's elements of Jocko, the man, that make me really like trust him deeply. And I think terrible situations that faced the tribe or the country or whatever you want to say, the person who I'd want to be at the helm would be Jocko Willink. Like, I've seen from his life long enough, and I've seen in enough instances that he has the fortitude to handle it, that he has the deep strength in this. It's the same strength that gets him up every day at 4:30 to work out. It's the same strength that he's been fighting for, the same things he's been fighting for. That is so evident in his life that makes me think, man, like, this is a person who I think could actually handle a crazy situation like COVID or like war,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, so let's get into, another guy. When you said the word fortitude, I thought of Dan Crenshaw, who,
interesting,
is an interesting choice, because if you had to like smash Ben Shapiro and Jocko Willink together, maybe is something of what you would get would be Dan Crenshaw.
That's true.
But oh man, yeah, definitely another guy for sure. And just for the record, a number of women have been popping into my mind that I really admire too. But we're talking about men right now, so maybe we'll have another conversation about that.
Okay, you're cleared. You're cleared from all the woke scolds.
Yeah, that's the goal. Stay clear of those. No, but genuinely, I'm just thinking like, because I was gonna say them and then I was like, oh, I literally just said we're gonna keep it to men. So okay, let's get into the why. Let's start with anybody and go into some of the why.
I was thinking about this today because he sent me a message saying, hey, do you want to talk about this stuff? And I was thinking, like, why do I admire the people who I admire? And I think I admire people for the same reason that basically every functional human should admire people. And I think at root, it is just, these are the people who should be in charge because they can bear the load of being in charge. These are the people who can bear responsibility and do it well and take care of their family, take care of themselves, and take care, like they're stable enough that they're taking care of themselves, their family, and the community around them. So it's the traits that would have, all throughout history would have elected so-and-so to be king. It's the traits that would have elected so-and-so to run the tribe. It's like these traits that I think show themselves in people who take responsibility for themselves, but they're also taking responsibility for the world. And I think Jesus is the absolute ideal of that picture. The man on the cross who voluntarily takes on the suffering of the world is that man, the man who takes the responsibility, not just for himself and not just for the world, but for the evil of the world. He takes on the responsibility for all of the darkness on himself voluntarily, up to which point? Up to the point of death.
Yeah.
And so to me, like, I think that basically Christ likeness, especially the Christ on the cross, Christ likeness is the thing that we all admire.
Yeah. Yeah. And even a step beyond that is Christ on the cross saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, man, that is just the most powerful. I mean, it's the most powerful picture in all of history, and it's a real one. It's not even just a made up story. That's really happened. That is a real picture that we can hold of a man on a cross, dying this death, bearing the sin and the weight of the world on his shoulders, still with the posture of sacrificial servitude to the
that's so interesting
infinite degree, right?
Yeah. And that makes me think of the fact that he said that obviously goes to show that he did know what they were doing. So he's beyond them in terms of his moral understanding, but then he's taking responsibility for those who didn't have the moral understanding. Not only did they act improperly, but they also didn't even understand that they were acting improperly. And not only did he take responsibility for their evil actions, he also was in that moment was saying, forgive them because they don't even have the understanding.
Yeah. It's that heart posture of unbelievably deeply rooted love and humility to be able to be bearing, we use that terminology frequently, talking about bearing a load or taking on responsibility, putting something on your back. And I just think, I mean, that is the absolute picture of that. But while you're doing that, while Jesus was doing that, the heart posture was still not, oh my gosh, I can't believe how heavy this is, or, oh my, like, this is so much responsibility and these people are ridiculous. It was bearing all of that while still having the heart posture that would lead you to take on that kind of responsibility, that kind of a weight in the first place, which is this love, which is humility. It's love. And then the humility to still take literally so much of a beating, but also from a spiritual perspective, this beating of the whole sin of the world being placed on his shoulders. I mean, it takes all of those things to just the infinite degree that they could possibly be. And he was all of those things, the unending love, the complete picture of humility in that moment. And
Wow.
I just think it's, if we're going to wrap up everything else that we're going to say about any of these other men, I have a feeling it's all going to point back to this moment of Jesus on the cross and this idea of sacrificial servitude towards people who, didn't necessarily deserve that or do anything to earn it.
Wow. Yeah. I love that. The conversation about men who we admire naturally turn to Jesus because it's unavoidable. Neither of us could have avoided it.
Yeah. How could it not?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. So I think that instinct for admiration that we see in people today, it was just lived out to its fullness once by one man. And he is the most influential human to have ever lived for that reason. But yeah, taking it back into today and into real life, Aragorn. I think the thing about Aragorn, the man, that is so impactful to me is it's something to do with the storyline of him being a king but not being recognized, and him stepping into kinghood. There's something about that. There's something about redemption, which is so admirable about a man. And it's not just redemption from he was lesser and he became like, he was evil and then he turned around and he became good or something. It was like, I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's an admiration because I see myself in him. Maybe it's something like I see the ways that in my own life, even today, even in this month, even in every journey in my family, in this podcast, whatever, I have this potential to realize who I really am, which is more like the king at the end of the series than the strider at the beginning, who's just fending off the boundaries of, he's just in the gritty fight, and he's dirty and he's kind of greasy and stuff, but it's almost like he doesn't realize the potential inside of him. And then as he goes along this journey, as he's compelled along this journey, him taking the responsibility that he does one step at a time draws out of him the most kingly and the most competence that he could have ever reached. And I think it's totally appropriate that he also gets the woman he always desired at the end of that too. But yeah, like there's something about that story, and I've always related Aragorn with Jesus, not just because he kind of looks similar, though maybe that's exactly why. Maybe that's all there is to it. But there's something about like I know I'm going on long about Aragorn, but I remember reading, there's a verse in the Bible that basically says, Jesus said such and such, and he said it with such authority that everybody was amazed. And I just thought, I might have even sent this in a message to you. I just thought, like, the Jesus who's painted in most people's minds is so much more feminine than that man 2,000 years ago who spoke with such authority that people were amazed. And I just thought, that sounds more like Aragorn. That sounds like Aragorn, like slaying people and people looking at his competence and people looking at his authority and just being in bewilderment. And I've just thought, the real Jesus was probably a lot more like Aragorn, and so much of the picture of Jesus in the West is not like that at all. Yeah,
that's an interesting point that you bring up, and I agree with you. I think the hard thing is to, take the sword out of Aragorn's hand, because that's what you have to do in order to form him into the real Jesus. But there's something about Jesus too, where it's like he fought just as hard as in my opinion, as any man that's ever actually fought in a battle. He was fighting for something, but he did it mostly peacefully, outside of a couple things like clearing out the temple with a whip and and that kind of thing. But he's the one who's telling Peter to put the sword away, right? And he's still, even in that moment, when in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter's like, all right, here we go, violence.
I hear what you're saying.
And Jesus is like, no, like we're putting that ear back on there.
That's interesting. Because I feel like this is something I could have said to myself a while ago too. But the Jesus, the man, I wonder if this is something I've just been pondering. And so this is my response now is I wonder if some of that like heavy leaning on the peace and stuff was because of what had to happen in his physical life, because Jesus, as represented in the whole Bible, is not that way at all. Like, he is not peaceful. He is the Jesus of Revelation is not putting his ear on anybody's, his hand on anybody's ear and healing them. Like, he is judgment. And so I totally, yeah, it's almost this conundrum of justice and mercy, but, or even judgment and mercy. But Carl Jung said something, this, I don't know why or how he kind of phrased this in full. All I know is that Carl Jung thought that, that Revelation was necessary to the Bible because it painted a more accurate picture of the real ideal being more aggressive. And it painted it was necessary because we didn't want just the peaceful Jesus. And, it's Carl Jung. He's pretty like way out there.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's kind of what I'm getting at is like there is this strength and this judgment about Jesus. And I wonder if some of that, if some of the things that occurred have been taken slightly too far in context, even to the point of like pacifism and stuff like that, which the real Jesus, the reason he did some of those things, maybe it was because he said all the time, these things need to happen for me to end up dying on the cross, basically, because he understood that was going to happen.
Yeah, it's a deep theological discussion just waiting to be had.
Yeah,
but let's stay a little more on course. So thinking through some other attributes of guys. So
I'm just wanting you to like allow Aragorn to keep his sword. That's all I'm.
Yeah, we might have to come back to that one. I know, no, but it is tough because there's so many. I mean, even like a real historical figure like William Wallace that I can't believe we left off this list to begin with. But so someone like that, again, very militant, and he's a revolutionary, but he has my absolute respect and admiration. And so, how do we balance the absolute ideal of Jesus but also looking up to someone like William Wallace? And so I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I don't have to take the sword out of William Wallace's hand or Aragorn's hand to look up to either of them. But
right.
There is deeper discussion there to be had between them and the absolute ideal of Jesus.
Yeah.
So let's go with somebody alive and non-fictional. Let's go into Jordan Peterson. I think this would be a really good one. Just because, man, I think he's spoken to our generation of men in a way that no one else has. He's connected with us in a way that nobody else has on the same level, and probably done more good and produced more transformation for good through his life than maybe anyone else that I can think of at the moment, especially again, specifically for young men in this generation. And so I think one of the things that I see in Jordan Peterson, I absolutely look up to, is just this perseverance and this drive towards what is good, and but also an openness to being wrong about things and continually adjusting when needed towards the end goal of what's good, but then doing everything to, giving your whole life towards something, not wasting your time. Like, guaranteed Jordan Peterson's never watched The Office or Lost all the way through, Dude, every episode of every season.
I hear what you're saying, but not true. Jordan Peterson, I'm sure he probably hasn't seen those, but he talks all about how much he's watched The Simpsons. So similar.
Really? Okay. All right.
Anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good for me to know though. Okay. Even The Simpsons is a little bit more intellectual than those other two things, but
Yeah.
but still a TV show.
Yeah.
Okay, fair point. So yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, or just to get at, is there's like this underlying drive towards accomplishing a goal, or towards pushing humanity or our generation, or break it down further into the people that he's immediately responsible for. So like, he's a professor, his students, for years, just giving his guts towards writing a book like Maps of Meaning, and developing these lectures on the Old Testament, all these things that just take, I mean, you imagine the depth of understanding that you need to develop in order to produce some of the things that he's produced. And you only do that kind of research and gain that kind of knowledge if you are so committed towards working towards the common good.
True.
And so I think there's that dedication, that perseverance, and that willingness to put so much time in, not really for yourself. I mean, maybe a little bit, like you want to understand for yourself, but he's developing his mind and his understanding on those issues and those ideas, so that he can teach them, and so that he can extract the truth out of those things, and then give it to other people who might never be able to have it for themselves if he didn't play that role. And so, there's something about that where it's just like years of hiddenness, but just complete dedication and drivenness towards something that's good and worthwhile is so impressive. And so, I mean, it's only one aspect of Jordan Peterson, but it's a huge one.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think I never thought of it in exactly that way. I think that's a huge element of why both you and I and so many young men admire Jordan Peterson, the man, not just Jordan Peterson, the intellectual, but Jordan Peterson, the man. I think as you were saying that, the things that were coming to my mind were like, he talks about in the 80s and going through the Cold War, he would have these terrible nightmares of catastrophe and how close the world came to complete annihilation, which it really did, like especially in the Cuban Missile Crisis. A couple times, really the whole planet was close to destruction. And we look back on that, we go like, oh yeah, it's good that didn't happen. But we pay no attention to how insane that was. And somehow we collectively decided, okay, this human thing is worth continuing. And that's why the world still exists today, right? But he knew the reality of that, and he just had nightmares about it because he understood the reality of it, because he studied history, because he knew what happened all through the 20th century. He knew about the evil of the human heart and what the human heart, the kind of darkness it was capable of, and it terrified him. And he always says, that terrified me so much that I just became obsessed. He says he thought for like 16 hours a day. Almost all of his waking time was thinking about these issues and just developing these issues. And it took him a long time to make a plan of how I'm actually gonna get to the bottom of some of these problems, or do my part to solve some of these problems. And that developed into him writing this, insanely deep book, Maps of Meaning, which then led into, more and more and more things. And maybe through, maybe just naturally, but maybe through supernatural intervention or synchronism or whatever, he ends up, going through a crazy controversy, which raises him to the public eye. And as soon as he gets to the public eye, it's like, everybody's like, whoa, you have so much to offer. So yeah, it's interesting because he always says, he almost says it like, I was forced by my own fear to figure this stuff out. And I would say that's true. That's true. But he wasn't forced by his own fear to get to the good and to get to a good solution. I would say that's the choice that's so admirable that we see playing out over time. And we've seen it. Like, I see him now, or in the last few years, and I see a man who has like a deep belief in the goodness of the world, and he's on the side of us. He's on the side of humanity. And there's something about that which he decided for himself, when maybe there was another Jordan Peterson who actually made the choice to he was just as afraid and he had just as much understanding. But what he did instead was he turned on a video game and cracked open a cold one. And he didn't deal with it in the belief of goodness, or even the belief that he could make a difference in the way that Jordan did.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And now that he has been launched into the public eye over these last few years, I think in that time, another huge aspect of why I look up to Jordan Peterson is his willingness to say what he honestly believes, and also his desire to do that in a way that informs people rather than tears people down. And he talks about it openly, you know, this idea of using minimum necessary force to, I don't know if he would even say win an argument, or to, you know, display the winning idea, the better idea in a debate or argument. And that just shows a value for other people and a love for humanity and a love for people that he doesn't agree with, and that he could just kind of follow suit with how the rest of things go and just lose all respect for them or something, because, well, how could you possibly not see it my way? But I think there's something about him where, yeah, he says what he honestly believes, but he does it in a way that he values people so intentionally. And I think that the combination of those two things, and obviously, you know, his ability to articulate these ideas so clearly, all that together just makes his speech and his communication something that I think we should all aspire to.
Yeah, totally. I think we shouldn't also look past the reason that I think a lot of people do listen to somebody who knows how to speak. And I think that plays into it as well, is he is just that good at speaking. And part of that is, you know, the way the way that he is able to speak well, literally speak well, but also like what you're saying, that fairness aspect, that he's always giving people the benefit of the doubt. And that's something particularly why I mentioned Sam Harris. Like, Sam Harris is probably at least the top 5 most famous atheists in the world. But that's something that I highly admire in Sam Harris, is he definitely not to the level of Jordan Peterson, but he definitely has this value for the opposing point of view that he truly respects. It's not just that he's acting like he respects, that he gains people's trust. He truly respects it. And yeah, I think that's really good. And that's something that when I see people who agree with me, I just wish that they had that. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I listen to people who, not even like politically, but just people in general. I don't want to name names on this because it's kind of a bit of a dig. And what I feel like is, I just wish that people had that kind of value for the opposing point of view, which is scary because it's any topic. When you see the other point of view, it's a lot harder to still believe what you truly believe. If you have, you know, no personal example necessary, but if you have a strong stance on abortion and then you sit down and you debate 12 people for 11 hours about abortion, you come out of that feeling like 11 hours. I sat down for 11 hours, but it was only like 7 hours of debate. You come out of that feeling like, yeah, I still believe the position that I held because the reason I believed them were correct. But actually seeing the other side for all of its worth takes away some of the motivation from the side that I had when I didn't fully understand their side to that degree. And it's kind of scary. It's a dip into hell. It's like the phoenix going into the fire. And then the thing that can happen is either you get burned and that's it, you're gone, or the alternative is you come out and you emerge from the flames as a phoenix and you are all the more powerful. So I feel like these are deep metaphors, but I wonder, one other thing I want to mention, just to say it, is that, like, that's what I was going to say. the word adopt responsibility, even the name of our podcast, that's like a tip of the hat to Jordan Peterson for what he's contributed. Like both you and I felt like these are the words. It's the idea that we want to get across, but we didn't want to call it taking responsibility or responsibility or anything. It was adopt responsibility, because those are words that he chose on his own. And I feel like it's a tip of the hat to him for us to even have chosen to call the podcast that name. Like, we highly regard this man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it could have been a lot of different names, and we talked through a lot of different names, but when it came down to it, we felt like this would be the name that would attract people who not thought even most like us, but were the most interested in, adopting responsibility.
Whatever this is. Yeah.
Whatever this is. Right. We'll be most interested in this, because it seems like the wording, the language that most clearly communicates what we desire to be doing with our lives in general, and what we're trying to do as well, in part through this podcast. And so there you go, Jordan Peterson. So, all right, moving on. Who, do you have anybody else in mind you definitely want to cover?
I don't really think so. Like, I feel like generally for a guy, the person who we admire is going to be quite like masculine as well. I think that's something that we haven't really talked about, but just the generally masculine traits are things that are admirable. And I think that almost everybody on our list, if not everybody, fits that. Like Jocko, Tiger, what do they have in common? They're good at jujitsu. Like
big,
they work
strong,
out. Yeah, they're big, strong, and they're those aren't even the important things. The fact is they're probably the two most disciplined men. Like, if I needed to send somebody to a distant island and know that they were going to like get up every morning and have a hard workout, and that's what they were told to do, I feel like the last two people still doing that would be like Jocko and Tiger. Whatever that is, that's admirable. It's like this discipline, fortitude, hardness, but still believing in being, still having goodness be their driving force,
Yeah, that's another really good thing to mention, is this resistance to hurt that leads to bitterness. This resistance to allowing unjust situations in our lives that, produce some measure of hurt. This unwillingness to let that stick around and to become part of the primary motivation for so many people.
So
dude, you hear so many people. I'm even watching right now The Last Dance, which is a documentary series about the Chicago Bulls, and as they're going into their the season that they're trying to win their 6th NBA championship. And, you even hear some of the motivations coming out, and it's like, oh, even somebody as great as Michael Jordan, you realize you're like, oh, it's not like just all love for basketball that's driven him to, or like the love for the fans of like, oh, I just want to give them like the best possible show. I'm sure there's some of that, but there's also these deeply rooted motivations of, man, I could never get my dad's attention, and I was always fighting for it. And how I got my dad's attention was finally becoming better at basketball than my brother. And it's like, whoa, it's crazy to get into. But so I think what you were getting at is the language for that I would use is, this resistance to in a hard line unwillingness to allow hurt and bitterness to become a part of the central motivation and the driving factor behind what we do. And
so good.
This, of course, goes back to Jesus for us again, ultimate picture of this, but maintaining love and goodwill at the center of everything that we want and we're trying to do with our lives.
Wow, that's so good. You just gave such good language to a couple words that popped in my head the other day when I was thinking about these things and trying to articulate it in my mind. And the thought that kept coming to me was this: in every situation, you can either take responsibility or you can take revenge. And I think that's I think that's basically it. I don't think that there is a middle ground. I honestly don't think there is. I think that it's Cain or it's Abel. I think that's what makes that story so powerful, is you can either become resentful, and you can either, you actually can't just play video games and crack a beer and enjoy that moment because you're scared of what might happen. The option is you can bring the world one step closer to heaven, or you can bring the world one step closer to hell with every single choice you make. I don't care about having a conversation about like free will or determinism. As you know, I've listened to like 10 hours of debate on that this week. But the conclusion I've come to is like, I don't care what the technical answer to that question is. The fact is, we all act as if we believe that we have free will. That means instantaneously, okay, first of all, it means that we believe in free will because we act as if it exists. And that's what belief is, as we established in our first podcast. At least that's the way I define belief. So without getting into like all these other tangents, what I'm trying to say is that means every choice that we make, every moment, and even every conscious thought that we have a say in choosing or not choosing. Am I going to think about this, or am I going to think about this? Am I going to watch this video or that video? Am I going to have this podcast conversation be about this or about that? Every single choice we can choose to sow into goodness or into destruction. And we truly, I believe, we truly have a say in where humanity ends up. It really was human beings who led the planet into the kind of death and destruction that we've had for the last 100 years. It really was human choices that brought us out of that. It really was some great heroic man going onto a boat at about 18 years old, or some at 17 or 16 with a bunch of gear and storming the beaches of Normandy in belief for setting people free from darkness, And so, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, every choice we make is going to send the world more into hell or it's more into heaven. I think that you just gave such good words, and I didn't have the right articulation until now, but the thoughts that were coming to me in the car was like, man, the options are either here is reality, and either I take revenge on reality, either I take revenge on being, or I take responsibility for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I love how succinctly you put that too. The wording that was in your head the other day. You either take responsibility or you take revenge.
Right.
And the reality is that responsibility is the only choice in that situation. Revenge is never the answer. And that it's that choice, as you just put it, is the simple way to understand which decision you're making. Let's assume that you started out with some purity of love and goodwill in your intentions and in your motivation for living your life in a certain way. And then every situation that happens where something can be legitimately unjust that happens to you, something can be actually bad that happens to you, but it's still the choice of responsibility or revenge. I'm either going to take responsibility and say, wow, there's a sign of something going wrong in the world. What, even more motivation for me to keep my intentions pure and to keep the goodwill of my heart at the center of everything that's driving me, rather than letting mixture in and letting it become tainted. And maybe that happens once and it changes a little bit. Maybe it happens again and you let some percentage of revenge mentality to seep into, or whatever other words you want to call that, hurt, bitterness, resentment, to sneak into your motivation. And it just makes this muddy mixture of motivation rather than not allowing that to happen and choosing to take responsibility. And maybe that means forgiveness. Maybe that means some measure of reconciliation, as much as it depends on you, or, whatever else. It could just totally depend on the situation, but just protecting that inner motivation and making sure that it's purely love, surrounded by this guard of humility.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you see so much of this in some of the like environmentalist talk. That's what's coming to my mind, is how anti-human it can get sometimes. is like, it's not just a belief in being that makes people care about the environment or care about, there's also this side that, and I would say any like political position, anything has both sides of this. And honestly, I think you could probably relate that to the good father and the tyrannical uncle. You could relate that to the fact that any man who gets power can either become the man. And obviously I don't just mean men, I mean the masculine side of men and women. The man who becomes powerful, he can abuse that, and he has the potential to abuse that. And it comes from resentment. But yeah, I feel like when you look at the environmentalist like movement, there are people with the right intentions who are trying their best to take care of the planet. But for some reason, when it comes to the planet versus humans, people who care about the planet so often become anti-human. And the thing that you hear all the time is, we are a cancer on this planet. And that's so interesting to me, because I think that is just so much resentment. That sounds so much to me like taking revenge, taking resentment. And it's like, what do you do with cancer? You cut it out, you destroy it. It's like, if we're a cancer on the planet, why don't you take care of yourself and go like get rid of your own life? If you think that you're a cancer, or are you saying that other people are a cancer and what, you're above them? There's something about it that's so resentful and anti-human. And it's not just, it's not like environmentalists have a different tendency than others. It's just one way that people express themselves, especially politically, that ends up being just so anti-human, you know?
Yeah, man, I think we hit on something so key here, is this idea of your inner motivations and making sure that it's purely comes from love. And I think across the board, I don't know, as we're kind of discovering that in this conversation together, I feel like that is almost solely the meter of admiration, or that's the measuring stick of admiration that I have for different people.
Wow.
And yeah,
are you just saying the meter for admiration is how much they choose to take responsibility as opposed to take revenge?
Yeah. Okay. That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
And so somebody, so another person we mentioned earlier, Ben Shapiro, was on our first list of people we were naming. And so something I admire about Ben, again, same as Jordan Peterson, I mean, his ability to communicate and articulate ideas is just phenomenal. It's just off the charts. I mean, 1% of the 1% in terms of communication skills, and probably intelligence as well, you know, amazing. And I also agree with him on a lot of things politically. Not everything. I don't even know all of his stances, but a lot of the things that I've heard him say, I agree with. And so yeah, somebody who I think deserves to be on that initial list of people that we agree with, people that we've, especially in the realm of politics, have looked up to. But I think why I don't hold him in an even higher regard would be because I feel sometimes like his ratio of, you know, responsibility versus revenge is, I'm just unsure about it, is what I would say with him, I guess. Yeah. I haven't seen a lot of things where I'm like, oh, that was like a really bitter, nasty thing to say, or I could tell he just like really hated that guy he was sitting across from, or something like that. You know, I think a lot of times it has come across as, I can see lots of scenarios where I would think, oh yeah, Ben is really motivated by that love for people, for humanity. Totally. And, you know, I definitely think there's a high measure of that. So he is someone that I still would look up to. But yeah, I just think with someone, he's an example of someone where I'm unsure what that mixture is like, kind of inside there. And so I think it's a limiting factor into how much I feel like I can look up to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for both of our sakes, I first want to clarify, we're talking about him in terms of somebody who we do admire. In terms of like the regular person, he is way at the top of that list. It's not like we're saying him as someone like at the bottom of that list. He's full of resentment. No. But I feel the exact same way. I feel like he is at the 99% in that meter, but I feel the exact same way. There's something about it, and it's not something he said. It really isn't. it's something beyond what he said. It's something deeper. And I think for both of us, the best way I can explain it for myself is like, I just have this instinct of like, there's a little bit of loyalty to his side, which has been taken slightly too far. And I think because because when I think of the way that he fights so vigorously for conservative values, for all of his political beliefs, I see someone who is extremely loyal to those positions. And I don't see that in someone like Jordan Peterson. So that loyalty is a good thing. It's necessary for some people to have. But I tied in with that loyalty is like a bit of an attitude of I will win by whatever means necessary. Here's a great example. He talks about, this is a way that he separates from Jordan Peterson and Dennis Prager. I feel like this is a great example. He talks about in college, if you want to get through college, just tell the professors what they want to hear. And when you get through, then you can, do everything you can to tear down their crazy ideas. But if you're in a class, you're trying to get good grades and you're trying to pass that class, it's kind of like a by any means necessary. I know that my side is right. So by any means necessary, I'm going to win.
Yeah.
Obviously, these are tiny examples. And he said that's what he did for him to get such good grades is he basically, he would dispute with his professors all through his education. And then when it came time to the test, his name's not on the test. So he would write essays that basically was exactly what they wanted to hear. He would pass with flying colors. Then he went on to develop a massive conservative media place that basically poked holes in all of those professors, and so for him, it's kind of like the ends justifies the means. Whereas something that is so admirable about Jordan Peterson is something that needs to be held at a higher position than loyalty is no, by any means necessary is not okay ever. You do not think that way. The means is everything. Everything is captured in the means,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good word to at least in part describe what we're talking about is integrity. And it's just, it's not true that the end ever justifies wrong means. That's part of, I think, another thing that was so powerful about a lot of the, not now, but, previous civil rights movement was that it was all about the means most of the time. For most people, there's exceptions to that. But vast majority, you look back in history and you just think, wow, what amazing people, because they knew what was right. They were fighting for what was right, but they didn't bend the knee to that way of thinking. They're saying they didn't stoop to the level of the people that were opposed to them. They actually took a higher road, and that made it even more meaningful in the long term, even if it was harder, a harder process to go through. So,
and it's actually really hard. Yeah, it's actually really hard to have faith in the idea that the means are everything. That I think it's true that you should never think the ends justifies the means. But that's really hard because I feel like 2 out of 3 instances, you have a choice between those two. You can just know what's right and try and just get there directly.
Yeah,
man, I'm speaking to myself. Like you can try and get to where you're trying, the end is here. I know that's better. So I'll just try and get there, the direct path, as opposed to what are the most honorable means. And it's really hard, but the alternative, there is no other alternative. You have to believe that the best means will lead to the best outcomes. You can't think that you can cut the corner. You can't ever think that you can cut the corner and get away with it, because I don't think that you ever do get away with it.
Well, and it points to, so when you're using the example of Ben Shapiro in college, just writing essays that he knew his professors were going to agree with, it points to having this too much trust in yourself, too much trust that you're right. And a verse from the Bible actually that popped into my mind as you were explaining that situation was in Romans in the New Testament. Paul is writing that book, and he says, it's just a simple little phrase in a bigger passage, so we could go into the context, but for now, he says, think of yourselves with sober judgment. And it's just one Bible verse, so I'm not trying to take it again, for the sake of time, I won't go into context and all of that. I hate to just take out one Bible verse and throw it in there, because you can make the Bible say a lot of things if you do that. But I think it's relevant to this situation where you do need to have this sobriety about our own capacity for good and for evil. And like we've talked about before, the dividing line of good and evil runs through the center of each man or each person, whatever that quote is. And it's just so true. And so when you dip over into having too much trust in yourself that you're right, or that you're
forgetting that half of you, not half, but you're forgetting that line is divided through your own heart. You're
disrespecting your own capacity for evil.
Exactly. Dude, that's so good. I think that has so much to do with Carl Jung's talk about the shadow, which is a complete mystic mystery to me. The more I think and try and integrate his philosophy around the shadow, but I think that's a huge component of it, is you don't know it. You just don't go there. You never forget the kind of shadow that's inside of you. The minute you do that, I think it would be awesome if we could cover this book called Ordinary Men. Have you ever heard of it?
I don't think so.
Okay. This will be one of the books. We can't,
Sounds good.
We can't do this thing where we just go on podcasts and talk about covering books forever, but I'll do it again right now. Ordinary Men is just a book about these decent cops in Germany who, as Hitler, they weren't young in Hitler's youth. They weren't one of Hitler's, young people who were totally swept up by all the rhetoric and stuff. They were already cops before all of this happened. And as the Nazi party took over, they were told, you can help us. You don't have to, you can leave, but you can help us by doing, you can go, do these dirty jobs that are not that dirty, but you don't have to do it. And they did it, and they struggled, and they started to fall apart. They started to get sick, and they went out and they, I don't know if at the beginning, I think they were doing pretty tame things. Like they were enforcing some of the laws, but they weren't killing anybody. Maybe they were going into people's houses, and maybe they were taking people outside and shuttling them into general areas. And I know at one point they had to clear out whole cities from a bunch of the people who were living in the ghettos, and they just had to clear it out. It's just the rules. They're just following orders. But as this, it's a whole book about this one little battalion of cops. I haven't read it. I've only heard, I've just heard people talk about it. I listened to a whole podcast about it too. Jocko Willink does it in a podcast. Anyway, but I think it'd be great for us to do too from our own perspectives. And as they go from doing kind of tame jobs, they kept getting asked to do worse and worse and worse things. And they fell apart. They hated who they were becoming, but they kept doing it, and they kept doing it. And as they did, they got sick. It was hell for them. And they got to the point that they were being asked to take women out into fields and strip them naked and shoot them. And they did it. And they took everything. They did it all to the very end. They are the ones, when we talk about Nazis, they are the ones who ended up there. But the story is all about their journey there. And I feel like we need an understanding of that shadow. We can't even see how good we can be without understanding how evil we can be. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. And there's something to another theme as we're thinking through it. Another theme that runs through a lot of these men, I feel like, is living your life as though you're so sure about what's right, and giving everything and dedicating yourself time, energy, just all of yourself towards accomplishing a goal or getting to some place or bringing other people to some place of understanding, or literal freedom, in the case of a soldier or someone like that. But you're fighting for something, giving your all for something that you think is right, but you're still aware of your own capacity for evil. You're still aware that you could be wrong about some part of it. And so I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but there's something about acting as though you're so sure of something and having this deep conviction that you are fighting on the side of good, but also at the same time maintaining this sobriety, this respect for my own capacity for evil, that I recognize I could be wrong about something that I'm doing. So I'm still teachable. I'm still humble enough to receive criticism and actually internalize it and process it and have it affect my my decision making, my trajectory in life. And so I think that's another common theme where, like, I know that if Jordan Peterson realized, or just, let's use Jocko Willink, let's say, if he became aware of something in his motivation or his trajectory in his life that was misguided, I really believe that there would be something there that would be able to say, you know, if he honestly saw that, I think he would just say, oh, I can't believe I didn't see that. Let me change and let me, you know, purify even further the motivations that are inside of me. And but I mean, there's somebody in those shoes, somebody who's already given so much, you know, gone overseas, a soldier, risked his life, gone through this crazy training, spent hours even training other people, doing all this preparation, giving yourself so fully to something, a cause that you believe is right, but still maintaining that humility and that teachability and that, I guess, tenderness maybe of heart, to where you're still sensitive to what's even better than the good that you've imagined so far.
Yeah, man, that's really good. The thing I'm thinking is, this takes it straight back to that word integrity. And the word integrity to me has come to mean like structural integrity, like a building has structural integrity, that things are in alignment. And that to me is, you have that voice in your head that's always saying, hold on, like, yeah, you're fighting for good. Yeah, but what about this? But what about that? And do you fully understand that? And that voice, that is what needs to be, you need to use that voice and pay attention. And I think the words pay attention that could have been the title to our podcast, because I think that's such a deep idea, because it's at the very depth of our soul or our consciousness, is this narrative that's always going on. And it's trying to pay attention. It's always trying to find the best mode, and it's always trying to steer you right. Oh, like, hold on. Yeah, you're fighting for this, but hey, the thing you just said isn't actually totally correct. And so it's like, okay, well, which one am I? Am I the one saying the things that aren't totally correct, or am I the one paying attention to myself say things that aren't totally correct? We are the one down there who is paying attention. I believe that wholeheartedly. That's us. That is, I don't mean this to say like that's us and there's nothing metaphysical that's interacting with that, because I think at root, I do believe that is a metaphysical interaction that's going on at the very depth. I think that's something that's not based in some sort of physical rationality. I think that's, but without even getting into that, I think it's just such an important concept. Like, that integrity is like, once you realize that you've been saying something that's not true, you realize that was just the chaff that needed to be burned, that needed to be burnt off. And when you get rid of that, you can come into this alignment, which is the integrity of your soul. And it's this integrity. And I think that's exactly right, because the thing I trust about someone like Jocko or someone like Jordan Peterson is I feel like they're in alignment. I feel like they have that integrity. That's the thing I trust about Sam Harris, is I feel like he's in that kind of integrity, and he's saying what he truly is thinking most of the time. Sam, I would say, would be very similar to Ben Shapiro. So these are people on completely opposing views on almost everything. But the value that I would say they're both on an equal playing field here is like almost all the time they're saying what they truly believe, and they're saying it with fortitude. But I also have an instinct on both of them that at times they seem to shut down ideas that are actually pretty good ideas, and they don't have a good enough reason why they shut it down. And they're actually just kind of playing this like means to an end game at times, but I still, highly respect them. But it's this thing that I was thinking recently, like, I think because of that integrity, I think that I would trust Sam Harris, one of the world's leading atheists, more than I would trust almost any church pastor I've ever met in terms of their own personal morality. I would trust Sam Harris to not cheat on his wife, for example, than I would certainly trust him more to be faithful than I would trust like any of the last few pastors that I've like actually seen to the level that I've seen Sam Harris's life.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Whoa. I think we got to talk about this a little more. That really surprised me. So what's made you feel that way? It sounds like maybe you've had some.
Have you
not
listened
so great.
have you? Oh, it's not even that. It's like it's not even, it's just that I've seen him be that honest. And it's not even like, oh, these particular pastors, I think they're about to just crash. It's more like they're playing this means to an end game to a much greater extent than he is.
So I feel like that scratches the surface on maybe a whole topic in of itself of masculinity within Christianity.
Right.
'Cause that's for someone who has modeled their life after following Jesus and is, given so much to that end, for you to say something like that makes me sad. I wish that wasn't the reality. I'm glad you're being honest about it, but something in me is like, man, what are we missing in masculinity inside of Christianity that could lead something like that to be true?
Right. And as a caveat, I'm not saying I believe all atheists are more on that side of moral truth than all believers or even all pastors, whatever. I'm saying of almost every pastor who I know, public or private, in comparison to Sam Harris, I would say that. And I think that's part of why he's so popular, though. Why he's such a popular figure and such a good voice for the atheist perspective. Not just like the intellectually atheist perspective, but just everything that he stands for. He's kind of like the steel man of that position. I think that's really useful because I do believe in truth. I do believe that when you seek truth, that you get to a better end than you would have got if you didn't seek the truth. And he has such a high value. I don't know if you've listened to him much, but the thing about him,
hardly at all.
Okay. So that's probably, it would be really helpful.
I'd get it a little bit more, I think, if
you would
had
get
more context. Yeah.
I'm not just using him as a stand-in atheist because I certainly wouldn't say the same about Richard Dawkins.
Sure.
Okay. He particularly has a value for honesty and for not lying, and he kind of sets that up as one of his main like core moral foundations is like, you just don't lie. You don't do it. And here's all the reasons why you don't do it. All the logical reasons. I don't need God. I don't need whatever. I don't need religion. You don't lie no matter what. And he gives all these reasons. And I hear him say it like by his voice. And I'm like, yeah, he believes it. He is in on the side of honesty and integrity, that alignment. He is in on that side way more than hardly any pastor I've ever heard speak to that degree. Like I've certainly heard pastors speak who I've believed in their honesty, like crazy. And I think they're totally on that side of integrity. Francis Chan comes to mind. But yeah, especially like, I just think it's a perfectly honest and fair thing to say. I would trust Sam Harris more than any church leader that I personally know to be faithful to his wife. So,
Wow. So what plays into that? Let's stay on this for a little bit. What do you think plays into that what's going on in churches or people's Christians' interactions with each other that is leading to that place. And it sounds like honesty is a huge thing. And I mean, for sure, honesty and integrity have to go hand in hand. They're practically impossible to even separate. So yeah, what's going on in our churches' lives together that's making us that way? I mean, my own experience of church has been a mixed bag, I would say. Definitely been around congregations of people that I feel like everybody is there because they're trying to serve God with their lives, and they feel like being on the right path and seeking God and wanting to do the best possible thing with their lives. I would say for a lot of people that I've met, that's why they're there. That's why they come. And I think that's a great reason. But then I think there are a significant number of people too, in a lot of churches that I've been to who I think show up because, well, maybe for one reason, it's just like a social thing that they might be more lonely than otherwise if they didn't go to church. Or maybe for some people, they just kind of feel like they need to in order to be okay in like their legal standing with God kind of thing, which gets really interesting. And but yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, you would think that church should be the place where, through a Christian worldview, you would understand, hey, we're all by nature of being born into this present age, we're broken and sinful. We're born into a broken and sinful state, and we need redemption and reconciliation. And we're offered that through God and through Jesus and through his ministry. And so, we're able to enter into that whole process. So it seems like we should be able to be vulnerable about, when we're not living up to the things that we say we believe, or when we're out of alignment. But it seems like a lot of the time that honesty goes out the door when we feel like we have to show up for church with, already in that state, or we have to kind of present ourselves as already being further along in that process of growth and sanctification in our own lives than we already are. So I don't know, is that consistent with your experience? Do you feel like that's kind of what has happened in the churches you've been to?
Yeah, totally. I think that's one huge side of the coin. And I don't feel like I have a full understanding of why the culture is that way, why it's not more vulnerable to some of those things. And I don't even think it's just about being vulnerable, because you don't have to be that vulnerable to have that kind of a value for honesty and integrity. Like, I think of many men who I know who wouldn't be that vulnerable about their inner lives, but they would be hell-bent. That's not the right word. Heaven-bent. Hell-bent on getting to absolute integrity. Men who are full of integrity, but wouldn't open up in those kinds of ways. So it's not even that. But yeah, I feel like that's a huge part of it. The other side of the coin that I'm thinking right now is like, we just haven't had it modeled well in the church. There's not this whole thing we're talking about, admiration for the masculine. That has been out of the church since the 50s. Like right now, 2/3 of people in churches in North America or in the US are women. There's only 1/3 of the people in church are men, which is insane. Like 45, 55, that should be crazy. That's a massive amount more percentage wise of women than men, but it's 2/3. It's
wow.
Like 31% of the church is guys, adult guys.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's only if you
when
account
it comes to
for
adults.
That's right. That's only if you account for people over 18 or something like that, 17, 18, 19, something like that.
So mostly you would say that's
boys.
Adjusting for people that are there voluntarily.
Exactly. Yes. Adjusting for the people who are choosing to be there. Of those people, it's 2/3 female, 1/3 male. And I think that is something that needs to be rectified if the church wants to survive. Because first of all, because if you get a guy to go to church, his family goes to church. If you get a woman to go to church, her husband doesn't necessarily go to church for, I think for pretty obvious reasons. But I think part of that is because the church has kind of lost its balls just to get the point across, that the church has lost its masculine side. Can you imagine? So think about the way that a man decorates his house compared to the way a woman would decorate her house. And then think about how a church is decorated. It's the way that the woman decorates her house. Have you ever seen an animal mounted on the side of a church, like on one of the walls? No, for other reasons, you know, I'm sure there's other reasons why it's not like that. I wish I could
say yes. I'm so bummed I can't answer yes to that right now.
It's like, yeah, it was this awesome church and there's tons of guys going. No, but the thing is, like, the institutional church, I'm not talking about the church that Jesus died for, all of us individuals who are aimed toward heaven. I'm talking about the institutional church. The institutional church has become so much less welcoming to guys. I remember last year sitting in a church service here, and the whole time just feeling like there's no place for me here. Like, I was thinking those exact words because I wrote them in my phone. I'm like, I'm not welcome here. There's no place for me. There's no place for me to say what I think. There's no place for me to have a meaningful conversation. There's no place. This church is almost irrelevant. Like, everything going on here is almost irrelevant to the things that I would need in a church, like as a guy, not just like as whatever, like my family needs and all that kind of stuff, whatever. But as a dude, like, I need a lot of things that this place isn't offering. And I think even down to like the music choices. We used to have hymns. We used to have battle songs. We used to have hymns that were all about doctrine and that were deep. And now it's like, I'm not hating on this, but there's an element of it that has turned off men that we actually do need to care about. The songs are all about the love and the affection. And I think if you were to list like 20 characteristics that are generally characteristics of the feminine versus the characteristics of men, the feminine ones, love, compassion, all those kinds of things, nurturing, those are the things that we would associate with the church and with even our picture of Jesus. But like goal driven, competitive, like whatever you want to put in this masculine side,
ambitious, driven,
ambitious, building. Yeah. It's like
zealous.
Exactly. All these things, which is all through the Bible. Like, are there any, you know, there's like 2 quilts in the Bible, yet we have quilts on like every wall of the church. Like,
we should get some like seraphim sculptures going on up in the churches. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I'm using these things as stand-ins for the point I'm trying to make because I feel like it gets the point across. It's like there's somehow, for the same reason that I don't really feel welcome at the institutional church of the West now, many men like me are not. There's nothing for me to do. There's nothing for me to accomplish. I can't go there and build something. I can't go there and sort out any problems. I just stand up, sit down, sing some songs. Yes, there is this more like nurturing side of my heart that gets touched at times, but like almost exclusively, I feel like almost every church is in a deep way so welcoming to the female and so exclusionary to the masculine.
Yeah, I honestly haven't thought that deeply about what you're saying, but at least on the surface as it's occurring to me, it seems like there's something there. I mean, so what do you think would change that? You know, if you're going to show up to a church, I mean, think of one of the churches that you've been to. Yeah. Right there in Canada where you're at, and what would change that story? What would make you feel like, oh, I am welcome here. There is a place for me. Would it be more passionate preaching? Would it be songs that are more about like the zealous nature of God, or, you know, his desire for bringing about justice? Or would it look like a whole different format for believers getting together?
Yeah, man, I think I have a lot of things coming to mind. All of them come under the heading of, if the church wanted more guys to show up, you need to orientate your church more towards the needs of those guys and stop excluding all those needs. So some of those things are what you mentioned, music that is more like at least including the masculine. It's not like you have to have masculine music without feminine, like feely, touchy, Jesus,
Sure.
lover of my soul. Like that song has touched my heart since I was a kid. But honestly, it is not nearly as relevant to me now as it was when I was 18. Like there is some aspect of me transitioning from child to man that doesn't need that in the same way I needed it as a child. So, but anyway, so we don't need to exclude the feminine things. I think just more towards the masculine in everything, the way that you decorate, the way that you have, preaching, having more, the biggest thing I can think of is being more relevant, like more relevant to the problems that are actually facing us. Like, how come you can't have a political conversation in a church service ever? How come nothing can be relevant? How come there's no talking philosophically in church? Like this conversation that we're having now, this would not happen in a church. But in my opinion, this is such a valuable kind of pursuit, the pursuit of goodness that I think was probably a lot more existent in the church of old. And even the hymns was all about doctrine. They wrote the hymns. They literally made hymns so that people would remember the doctrine. They would take the doctrine and they would write it into a song so that people would go home singing them. And they had 200 songs that everybody knew and all the guys could come and sing, Onward Christian Soldier, these songs that just, they would not be welcome today. There's no place for them today. Instead, we have 200,000 songs which get projected on a screen, and we don't, it's not about me holding the book, reading it. I just look at the screen and it's like, okay, if I'm feeling like I could sing along, but I look around the room and pretty much no masculine men are singing along. And actually half of them would probably be better off like not being here and going and building something. I should actually get better at, sometimes when I say things like this, I say things like that sentence as a stand-in for what I'm trying to get across in general. But I think especially as a podcast, I need to get better at not being so like unliteral. I think there are definitely instances that I've gone to church and I would have been better off to do something like more productive in terms of I could have went and like built something or whatever. But I'm not saying that every guy who is sitting in church would be better off just like on a construction site. But there is
I hear
that
what you're
need.
saying.
Yeah,
and you're thinking for other people too. You're not, because it's a bigger issue than just your issue.
right.
Clearly, if it's a 2/3 to 1/3 divide, that's a big deal. That's why we're talking, part of why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And so there is something there. It's not like it's just your own personal experience. So I get why you're talking about it as a bigger issue.
Yeah, exactly. And in that, the interesting thing is that when the church is still in its building phase, that it's more like 50-50 men to women. And it's once the church is built and it's all about nesting and it's all about keeping things continual and there's no building, there's no competition, there's no fight. That's when the men start fading off. But when it's like, we need to, this is from a guy, I wish I could remember his name. Sorry, I can't remember his name. Anyway, guy who studied all this stuff like masculinity in the church. And while a church is growing and while it's building, the men are really involved. So I think a huge thing would be honestly, the first thing I can think of is be more relevant to the issues that people are actually needing, the philosophy, the even politics. How are we going to face the issues in our own city? Like, how come I went to church so many times? It's all about this like this theoretical stuff, which is so important. But how come we never talked about like the issues going on in our city and how we as a congregation, we're going to fix those particular issues? I'm not saying that churches don't do that, because I know in some, especially feminine ways, they do. Like, let's feed the sick, or let's feed the poor, let's take care of the sick. More of the feminine roles the church often does. But what about, hey, are enough of you guys willing to put an extra couple hours of like building and working, and we can volunteer and we can build this like awesome structure that needs to be built, whatever, like, I think first of all, being more relevant. Second of all, I think having a place where men can actually use their masculinity for, that they can be useful. Cause that's how I feel when I go to church, is like, okay, yeah, I had like a little moment of like, maybe every once in a while I had a little moment of like a spiritual touch, which was meaningful. And yeah, I hope that makes the world a better place in the end. But for the most part, I just kind of feel like I'm sitting here being useless. And I am. Like, how would I go out and do something good? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what I hear in that is a huge value for mission and goal oriented action, game planning, and I mean, I think that's why so many men come into Youth with a Mission, the organization that we've both worked with, and absolutely thrive on the projects that are happening and the things that you can take action on. And
exactly.
I know that for people who first show up to YWAM, it's actually significantly more women show up than men. But I think in terms of the people that actually stick around and are on staff for years and years, I think the divide really goes away.
That's true. That's so true.
I don't know the numbers.
It's true though.
But yeah, so people that like really find their mission, find something to put their hands on and go to work accomplishing. I think there's a lot more men who are interested in that kind of thing. And you even mentioned like certain ways of serving being more feminine.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something to that. I don't know. But I think there is something that's like, okay, so something big going around the internet right now is just this awareness of human trafficking in the United States. And people are waking up to the fact that, I mean, I woke up to this fact a number of years ago, but it seems like a lot of people are just understanding for the first time based on what I've seen online, is that people are realizing, oh, this stuff is actually happening way closer to home than I thought. Or maybe there was somebody a few counties away who got abducted, or maybe there was some girl who got like convinced there was this job opportunity somewhere. So she went there and, oh my gosh, she was from like a neighborhood that's close to where I live. And I like, so things like that, and people are waking up to it. So I don't know, maybe one overall outcome, that's a specific example, but things like that, where there are real issues, it's real darkness and evil things that are happening much closer to home than we ever talk about them, or at least the situations that I've been in so far. But having a congregation of people taking ownership and responsibility together and saying, hey, this is an issue right here in our backyard, or right here in our county or state, or whatever level you want to think about, and then say, man, we need to step up and take responsibility and intervene with good in the face of this evil. It seems like that kind of talk you're much less likely to find that than guaranteed, if you show up to any church with young people in it, you're going to be hearing songs about God's love and his affection for you, which is real and it's good. But I think that ratio of how much of that is going on compared to how much of that action planning of what are we going to do about this following Jesus business seems like it's a little out of whack for attracting men at an equal ratio to women.
Absolutely. Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And I think that was such a huge draw for me to leave everything and go to Nepal, was this like adventuring. There is an evil out there. There's a darkness, and I am somebody who can actually make a dent in it. I am somebody who can sacrifice. I can do, all of these masculine trait things. I can build, I can work, I can, risk my life. And I think the issue of like human trafficking and kids and stuff, for a man, for the masculine, this is the masculine in men and women, but especially for a man, there is something inside of us that turns on the protector. There's this protector thing that gets turned on in especially with like kids. And so I think I've seen the same thing, is as everybody's seeing that, human trafficking is real. And a lot of kids right now are in terrible darkness right in front of our nose. I feel like something like this is such a good place for men to fall and actually be able to do something about it. And yeah, it's so true. Like there's some part of us that comes alive that is like, I want to protect, I want to. And so as I heard about that issue, when I was 18, that's exactly my response. My response was like, this is so evil. This is so dark. I can't believe that this happens. These women in Asia, which is what I had found out about, especially like young women and the girls that we like worked with, they were kids, really. Like there's no underage woman. They're children. Like there was this like protector that rose up inside of me and wanted to risk. And what the Western church had to offer me was not, like, for other reasons too, but it was not enough for me. It was like, this is not enough darkness. I'm built to fight a larger dragon. Like, let me fight something more dark and evil, because I know I have the capacity for it, or at least I got to figure out if I have the capacity for it. And I think that's exactly what happens with YWAM is, yes, so many more women come because so many more women are in the church and so many more men are getting into, trade jobs, whatever. But for whatever reason, more women come. But the men, oftentimes, way more often than the women, they stay. And when they do, they generally get married. And the women who stay, it's like maybe most of them get married, but a lot of them don't. But yeah, there's something about that adventure. Let's trek Bibles to the unreached people of the Himalayas, and every guy's just like, yeah. There's something. Not that any of us would admit it, or not that any of us would even speak on those terms, but there's something inside of us that says like, yes, I need to risk. I need to run. I need to do, to give and to sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something we could go on talking about, and we should revisit it again. I'm sure we will in later episodes, but I think that's about all the ground we have time to cover for today. Man, such a fun conversation. I feel like we uncovered so much in there. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it myself just to unpack it more.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. I feel like we're also getting better at talking, which is really helpful. We're both getting better at talking and getting better at hearing each other.
If you're listening to this, you're welcome.
And as we do, we can solve problems much better. Yeah, I think this is the point of this podcast is there's things that need to be said, and here's a place that we can say them and have somebody, whether it's, the other one of us or somebody else who we're interviewing or talking to, have somebody else respond. And as we get that, we can kind of see like, okay, this is the human's response to the things I'm feeling and saying, and we can learn a lot from that. So that is the value for truth that we were talking about, and the value for speech that we even began with. Because I'm awesome, I can turn everything together in a perfect segue. That is the value for speech and for truth at the very core of it, which is why this is a worthy endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. This has been fun. Masculinity 101 here.
Take revenge. Do not take revenge. Take responsibility or take revenge.
Wait, take responsibility, not revenge.
The choice is take responsibility or revenge. And obviously,
the choice is yours, but choose wisely.
All right.
All right, man. Super fun. Till next time.
Yep.